Okay, welcome everybody, and welcome to our latest topic. And so a little bit about myself and our company. Here's the current introduction slide for this. We have been in business for about 15 years now, and our sole purpose of doing business is to work with procedures and try to eliminate procedure errors, the programmatic controls associated with the development of procedures, the review of procedures, work instructions, work planning. This is the area that we work with. This topic came up about mitigating the problems with procedures is because of, if I look at the volume of work right now, currently Procedure Solutions has over 3,000 procedures in the queue for my staff to fix, for a multitude of different industries: petrochem, refining, commercial nuclear, non-nuclear, utility generations, government agencies, Department of Energy. We are quite busy. And I look at this, and one day I sat back and I'm like, and I looked at some of the horrific looking procedures that are coming across for our company to fix, which is a great thing for us. I mean, this is why we have a business that we're doing, but not a good thing for you, right? And I'm like, why is this? Like, this is, I mean, we've literally been in business. We celebrated our 15th year in May of this past year, right? And I think about literally and I'm not trying to embellish this, and even in the least bit, but if I think of the thousands of documents that we touch every year, what's going on here? This. Now, also, if I look at the training classes that we provide on how to write procedures, our classes have pretty much either not doubled or tripled in size over the last couple of years. So there's a lot of interest about how to write procedures and how to human factor these documents. But I think it's missing the mark a little bit. To be able to have an effective procedure not only takes the programmatic controls to understand what does good look like and provide the training and the tools to develop that tool in itself, but the procedure has to go through some type of review process, because I think many of you would probably agree with me is that if you write a procedure yourself, you review it yourself, and then say it's good, most likely there's something going to be wrong with it. That's why we have revisions to things, right? And sometimes it takes a multitude set of eyes looking at a document, looking at it from different experiences and perspectives, to really truly look at the procedure and eliminate the errors that sit there, and sometimes are latent, that can sit there for numerous years. We have customers there that the problem sat there for 12 years before the explosion occurred, right? So my point is that I felt the necessity to say, hey, Sarah, the next lunch and learn, we ought to talk about this process. So here's where I like to go with this. And so I'm going to get the right screen here. Just give me a second, I hit the wrong button. Here it is. So here's a problem statement. Many labor hours are spent drafting procedures and routing them through a review process to ensure they are technically correct, safe, and usable. Right? That's the key points, right? Despite best efforts, many of these procedures face the exact challenges they were reviewed to eliminate. Now, how do these seemingly well-drafted and reviewed procedures fall short despite going under some type of review process? How is this happening? All right. So let's make sure that when we're all talking about procedures, because this is a very global audience, there's a lot of different names that are called the things, but here's the pure definition of procedure as we discuss it for this webinar or for this lunch and learn, that is taken from both the Procedure Professionals Association and their writer's manual, which is the standard out there that's used in many different industries as what is good, that what does good look like. This document is what is being used in numerous different industries today. It was originated over 20 years ago in the commercial nuclear power industry, and it has just blown up in different industries. I would say 90% of the work that we have today is in the petrochem and refining areas. using the standards that we're going to talk about today. Okay, so definition, procedure. It's a controlled document designed to improve human performance, right? By clearly providing the purpose, the specific intent, and a sequence direction for activity, program, or process. Now, breaking it down a little bit further, normally procedures will fall in 1 to 2 categories. They're either technical in focus or they're administrative in focus, right? A technical procedure is a document that outlines a series of steps for the operation, maintenance, or testing of a system, structure, or a component, right? Alternatively, then you have administrative procedures, which are documents specifying requirements and actions to implement a program or process. So if you collectively take that together, you have a procedure. Now, one thing you don't want to do is call everything a procedure. If you call everything a procedure, you're wasting your time. Basically, nothing is a procedure. These are documents as defined here that are there to improve human performance and compliance, right? So that's it. They're a hybrid, very specific document, right? Now, interesting enough, you get into OSHA and you get into like process safety management. If you look at operating procedures and practices, it says that operating procedures describe tasks to be performed, data to be recorded, operating conditions to be maintained, and samples to be collected, and safety and health precautions to be taken. So just a little bit different spin, but pretty much very much the same in many ways, right? Now, something that came across the internet I thought was kind of interesting. And this came from process safety management, which is like the quality assurance plan area for the petrochem refining industries, right? As compared to in the commercial nuclear, you have NQA1, which is the National Quality Assurance Standard, right? Which is the foundation for the quality programs for all the commercial nukes and SMRs and everything else across the world, right? So here, I saw this on the internet. I thought was interesting. Unlike the intent of typical documents or guidelines, procedures should always be considered a tool designed to support and improve human performance. They further went and said, treating procedures as if they were equipment, like a pump, valve, or reactor, which they're talking about chemical reactions, right? Or safety systems, is fundamental for building a successful process safety management systems. And I recognize some of you don't fall under process safety. If you guys don't fall under process safety, then what do you fall under, right? So they further said that who would start up a new process, which is a new system or a new process of maybe a new batch of things that you're creating, without all the pumps in place and tested? What craftsperson would tackle a pump seal replacement without the required tools and parts? By accepting this idea that procedures are components, the concept of requiring effective procedures will naturally fall in place. And this came from 1996. Additionally, and some of you attended my classes, this is like one of my favorite things in the world here, was the horrible accident that occurred in the Gulf of Mexico in 2010 from the BP DeepWater Horizon explosion and fire at the McCord well. Now, the Chemical Safety Board, which is csb.gov, conducted the investigation of that accident, which was one of the largest environmental disasters in U.S. history. I think of January of 2023, the total bill's up over $41 billion in damages and counting. Okay. Now, there was about a 500-page report that the Chemical Safety Board that did on this accident. And what I did was I searched for the word procedure, instructions, and things of that nature. And there's a couple things that I cut and pasted out of this document that I thought was really interesting that applies to what we're kind of talking about today. First off, they had some significant equipment failures, right? Now, they have multiple safety barriers in place for this equipment just like the commercial nukes do, where they have multiple trains of safety equipment. As such, they have multiple safety barriers put in place. And when you look at those safety barriers, they made a comment in the investigation report as follows. There was a blowout of this well, obviously, and now while multiple safety barriers had been intended, all were penetrated by complex, multiple failures caused in total by unrecognized technical issues, procedural weakness, and human errors, which is the core of what we're here to talk about today. Okay? Now, additionally, a little bit later in the report, there was another paragraph that came out and said, you know, while not directly related to this failure of this safety device, which they called a blowout preventer, they were doing some testing at the time that this thing failed, all right? The test procedure that they used was inadequate, both in the level of detail in the procedure and in the execution by the staff. The procedure did not contain sufficient information on steps, expected pressures at key points in the displacement and bleeding of certain volumes in the process of the testing they were performing, or even what the criteria was for a successful test. Now, I stepped back and I said, all right, well, this is exactly why we're here with Lunch Learner today. How does this happen? How? Right? I guess maybe if we all had that magic wand and we could wave it and we all knew how, we wouldn't be here, right? But yet it happens. So then they went on further, and I thought this was the key paragraph that really grabbed my attention. BP, after the accident, hired their own expert, right? God knows how much they paid that person, you know, to be an expert, okay? And then the expert commented that when they reviewed the procedures and everything, despite the thing that you just saw on the previous slide, they said, look, the rig crew does not have to be told how to really do their jobs. This should be a routine operation that fits in with their training. Now, one of the core principles of human factors is that people make mistakes. So I have no idea what the hell this guy thinks he is as an expert. I have no idea, right? That basically classify yourself as an expert and not understand that one critical aspect, that statement is completely beyond belief and missing the primary point that people make mistakes. The Chemical Safety Board says in the very next sentence, and I think this is key, is that this sentiment does not address the fact that procedures are more than a set of instructions. They are tools for competent people. I cannot begin to tell you in the last 15 years where I have talked to some of my clients and they said, Steve, you know, we think this is too much detail. Or this step that says stop the pump before the level gets too high. That detail is more than enough. And I'm like, well, what's a high level? Like, where do you stop it at? Well, our staff's competent. We don't have to say that. Oh, by the way, the step that says close all the vent valves. We raise a question. How many vent valves are there? Is there a list of these? Do we care, right? No, our staff is competent. Competent people make mistakes, right? So we got to get past that. We got to get past that mentality, especially today as the newer workforce is taking more of the larger portion of the workforce than some of us baby boomers that have been around for the last 42 years of industrial experience, right? Notice in this sentiment that they say is that the fact that procedures are more than a set of instructions, they are tools for competent people, motivated individuals to plan, coordinate, verify, and here's a key piece right here, assure performance will achieve the intended results. So, procedures, why do we need them? Why are they mandated in process safety management, the national quality or the nuclear quality assurance standards? Because we want to ensure that the performance that we're supposed to have, that the job that we're going to do has a certain outcome that we're expecting. We want to make sure that that outcome is what happens, and that's all that happens, right? The paragraph down below it is another one of those testimonies that says, hey, there was arguing back and forth between Transocean, who owned that rig, and BP about who owned this really bad procedure. Who owns this, right? But in the end, who was left to figure the things out? The crew. And that's the people that you saw on the first slide there, about the ones that passed away in that accident, right? So here are, I went back through, I can't tell you how many assessments I've done in the last 15 years. And I'm not trying to embellish this. I'm not trying to say that Steve is all this or trying to make a big name for procedure solutions. Please, we're not trying to do that at all. We're trying to have this big discussion with all of you. Maybe some of you will write me back with some answers yourself and help us see this, right? But here are some notes that I've taken from some of the assessments that I've performed over the last 15 years, right? I have found that in many cases, there is no formalized procedure review process. There's maybe a management of change review process, but when it gets to the procedures, it's part of the management of change review process, silent, right? The procedure revision process is often performed entirely what we call knowledge-based. There's different performance modes that we all use when we perform work. One of them is called knowledge-based. Knowledge-based means that you're using the own knowledge in your head to answer your own questions on how to go do things. The procedure doesn't tell you. The procedure may tell you what to do, but it doesn't tell you how to do it. So you're using your own knowledge. When you're using your own knowledge, the error rate for that, and you can Google this, is a 1 to 2 to 1 in 10 error rate. That is significant. As compared to using a well-written procedure, that the error rate is between 1 in 100 and 1 in 1,000 chance of screwing something up, right? It was noted in my assessments numerous times, well, Steve, this is the way we've always done it, right? If a formalized process did exist, the staff did not follow it as directed in their programmatic controls. But then you look at it, and if you look at their procedure culture, or did they have any guidance at all on how to follow procedures, or what the, we follow procedures, Steve. Well, can you show me what do you have any guidance that tells people how to follow procedures? No, we just do it, right? Or what it says is that what I get handed is there is no programmatic controls, or the controls are extremely vague, right? At times, I was handed a draft procedure use policy that was many years old and still had a watermark on it that said draft. These are huge companies. We're talking about, looking at oh my gosh, I'm having a brain cramp. But if you're looking at the stock exchange, these are top 100 top 100 companies that have this stuff, right? If a formalized process existed, the steps of the process was vague and subject to interpretation, such that the process was performed inconsistently, and in many cases, they were never in compliance, right? Although the staff felt that they were meeting all the requirements per their interpretation of what the requirements were, or the process was telling them to do, because it was written so vaguely, right? Maximum latitude in many cases, I've been told, was wanted, because if we document exactly how we do this, we could be held accountable for what we documented. I get contracted by 3 different regulatory agencies to help perform inspections, right? I would tell you, we are not that stupid. We're not that stupid. We know what you're trying to do, right? I mean, so what you don't write down, you're still accountable for following the rules for it, right? Now, if a formalized process existed and was followed, the process didn't meet industry standards. In many cases, the staff was unaware of any industry standards and, as applicable, any regulatory requirements, right? Or I get a quote, Steve, you're kind of talking to us like we are a process safety management site. We don't have to meet PSM. But you understand that those requirements in PSM, although you may not be required to follow them, they're not bad. I mean, they do. There's a reason why they're there, right? And so the reason why they're there, just like in the commercial nuclear power industry, the reason why we have these process controls is for consistency and for quality and making sure that we're safe and we're following all these things, right? And so you got to come up with something, to have these rules laid out so that you're just not winging it, where it was. So then you come up and look at this next slide. Validations of procedures are not performed. I've asked people, do you perform any validations? And they looked at me like, what? What's a validation? Well, I mean, like when you get the drafted document, do you kind of walk it down and verify that the steps are right in the right order, that you can perform the steps as they're written? Is there any other considerations that should be taken? Like, you got to do climbing, any special personal protective equipment that you need? Sometimes the people who write the procedures are, I mean, although they should be walking the procedure down in the field themselves to confirm all this stuff, but it's, again, it's a team effort here. We all want to go home at the end of the day, and so, you guys perform any validations? No. Okay. Or what I found is well, it goes to the MOC process, it gets approved, we use it, and then we find some stuff wrong with it, and then we change it. So I said, so you're actually waiting until you use it the first time? I mean, what about that first time and things blow up? I mean, sometimes that's the last thing you do, right? And they're like, well, no. Sometimes, we use it and then we do it. I said, well, why don't you walk it down and do it before you do that, right? I mean, now you got to prove document, now you got to rev it right away. Does that make sense? Well, we always got to rev it after we use it. I mean, we don't always know what we don't know. Or no validations for perform in the field or inconsistently as requirements stated what to do, but not how. For example, I did have a couple plants, a couple different refineries, and there was a step in their process that said perform procedure validation. Asked 5 different people what that meant. I got 5 different answers. So that means the validation is not worth it. It's not working. Okay. In many cases, the validation of the procedure was optional with no clear guidance on when the validation were required. Matter of fact, this is a nuclear example. The guidance was vague, and it says perform validation if extensive changes were made to the procedure. What is that? Anybody know what extensive changes are? Very subjective, right? I bet you we could all sit in a room. I could lay a procedure down in front of you and say, is this an example of extensive changes? And half of you would say yes, and half of you would probably say no, right? So that statement is pretty weak, right? Validations were noted as required if the standard operating procedure was directed as part of a recovery actions found in an emergency operating procedure or an abnormal operating procedure. However, when the staff was interviewed, no one knew that the specific EOP or AOP was actually connected to that SOP, so it never got done. So sometimes, some people know, like operations people will know the emergency operating procedures and AOPs and which things that SOPs tied to them, but sometimes people in the SOP that's being called out in the EOP, but yet the person doesn't know that their SOP is tied to an EOP, and so then the validation is not getting done. Many interviewed are unaware of the procedure program requirements as outlined in Process Safety Management or NQA1. To fix procedure quality issues, they are typically looked at from the procedure development side. So what I'm trying to say is when someone finds that they got a bad procedure, they just think it was developed bad. But then, wait a minute now, how did you have a poorly developed procedure not get flagged by someone in the organization to say, this procedure is worthless? Like, what is this? And you know what I mean? So when what happens is that companies look at it, they don't look at the process. They say, oh, well, we need better tools. So we're going to go ahead and spend millions of dollars to go, and we're going to have dynamic procedures, right? Electronic procedures, right? That's going to fix everything. All the procedures are going to be connected to all these different databases. People using procedures are going to have information right at their fingertips. Yeah, you will. But you know what happens? When you have a bad procedure from the beginning, and then you basically import that bad procedure into a dynamic electronic database driven tool, what do you have now? A bad dynamic tool. right? Matter of fact, you've just added another layer of potential failure mechanisms because you've taken that really bad procedure and now you've digitized it, and now you've added another layer of potential failure mechanisms to it, right? Some people say, well, we just need a better template. Well, yeah, you're right. I mean, I have a lot of people, a lot of my clients say, oh, Steve, we have this template, you know. I'm like, that's not a template. That is a fillable form, right? A template is something that basically locks in the standard formatting so that every procedure that is put into this template will come out looking the same way, the same numbering schemes, the same structure to the document. Us human beings like structure, right? So then what happens is I also say, well, Steve, we really just need a better routing tool electronically to make the review process easier for people to do. All right, well, now what you're doing is you got emails coming up that says you have a procedure. It's like the old, you have mail, you know, in the old movies and stuff. Well, you have a procedure in your box. It still doesn't tell you how to review it. You don't know of any controls how to do it. You just know that you have something in the box and that there's some deadline that you need to do it. And so you're just doing it the way you think you did. You know, whatever you're applying is the best thing to do it. But yet, and this is the mark on the controls used for technical safety and human performance. It's not even looked at. As a result of the lack of effective procedure program administrative controls, no training is provided on how to perform technical reviews or validations. So the staff, I mean, especially you think about if you have staff that's changing out. I got some of my customers that Steve, he says, Steve, you know, engineering, we can't keep an engineer more than 2 years before they move off to go somewhere else. The turnover. I said, well, do you train, you know, is there something part of their training, initial training when they get here that tells them how to perform procedure reviews and what to look at? No, we don't have that, right? So just about the time someone figures out how to do a procedure review, they leave, right? There is no clear procedure quality standards defining what does good look like. Lots of times no one knows what good looks like. They look, whatever was on the shelf and was approved by somebody else, they said, well, obviously this was approved by somebody else, and we'll make it look like that, right? Procedure writers and reviewers are focused on the technical adequacy and safety and have little or no sensitivity to the impacts that occur to the procedure user and task assess as a result of the lack of usability or the human factors emphasis on documents, right? No programmatic controls supporting the development of procedures, or if controls are provided, they have been found to be significantly out of date as compared to the latest industry standards, right? And so here's just an example of, let's see, get this, if I click on this, this comes up. This is, again, and I'm not trying to sell you on this. I mean, I don't get any financial gain from this with this. So what I'm trying to get is, but I will tell you that this is an excellent document, and this thing is available from the Procedure Professionals Association. You can go to their website, you can sign up for it, you can get a download for it, you know, and you can go to the website to get this stuff. But this thing has been around for over 20 years. And I would tell you that this is getting ready to be revised now, currently for Rev 4 to include dynamic procedure content and what to look at there. But this thing has all the different stuff on how to write a procedure focused on the usability, technical adequacy, and all those different things. And so I would tell you that we support 2 of the largest energy companies in the world globally. This is being used in Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, Nigeria, Angola, Malaysia, Singapore, Australia, Guyana, Canada, Mexico. I would tell you it's being used all over the place for it, right? It has grown in popularity exponentially, especially in the last couple of years, right? As people are looking at this. I thought it would be very limited. And of course, I should say Slovenia, you know, up in the European countries, right? And I would say that this is very, very, very popular. Department of Energy here in the United States, you know, so all this is there, right? And you can see this for purchasing, becoming a member, and you get it. You can work with them to get a download for it, right? All right. Now, on the following slides, let's look at OSHA for a second. Now, I know not all of you are OSHA folks and or tied to process safety management, but OSHA states that the process safety management standard applies to any process that involves a chemical with quantities at or above the threshold listed in Appendix A. You go to Appendix A, and then all of a sudden you come up with this appendix here, and it says, hey, if you got in these chemicals in here, and then let's scroll through it real quick because we got to watch our time here with this. All this stuff, if you're playing around with these chemicals, then you are in this box for process safety management, right? You know, and then they have category 1 flammable gas, and so they say if you meet this criteria for what for this flammable gas, you know, here's category 1. It gives you what the criteria is. And if you meet this, then you fall, you know, whatever you're manufacturing, you fall under process safety management, just for some of you guys that are in the utility industry that don't know what this means, right? All right. And so that's just a slide about process safety management, right? So then you come over here and then let's look at some of the things that this OSHA requirement says, right? Now, this is kind of interesting because, again, you'll see very much parallels with the nuclear industry, commercial nuclear industry. Matter of fact, I would say actually they're even more detailed than the commercial nukes are in NQA1. Procedures need to be technically accurate, understandable to employees. Well, that's interesting. What does understandable to employees mean? Human performance. That was a big thing the nukes were missing 20 years ago. We were trying to make sure our procedures were technically correct and safe and missing the human performance piece, right? And so now there's this big push to make sure that the procedures can be, you can read the step and understand it, right? And some people will read it and look at the step and say, you know, that step's technically correct. And then you or I would read the step and try to figure out what the hell is this trying to say? What is this? What is the step that's trying to say to us, right? What am I supposed to do with this, right? And so we figured out that, hey, that's a problem, right? So even looking at, so notice that they should be revised periodically and ensure they reflect current operations. Operating procedures should be reviewed by engineering staff and operating personnel. So, hey, if you're an operating procedure, if an operations area, notice that this is like this is a regulatory requirement. This means that in your process, something should be saying, hey, we got to make sure that when this procedure goes out for review, engineering looks at it and also operating personnel, right? To ensure that they are accurate and provide practical instructions. Well, that gets back to the human performance side of stuff on how to carry out the job duties safely, right? Operating procedures will include specific, you know, I see all kinds of stuff that's vague. I don't know how you meet the definitions for specific or details on what steps are to be taken or followed and carried out in the stated procedures. Operating procedures need to be changed when there is a change in the process or as a result of management change procedures. So if you have an MOC and you're changing out equipment, you got new stuff, obviously the procedures need to be looked at, right? Then you come over here and you look at the next thing that says, PSM also says the consequences of operating procedures need to be fully evaluated and the information conveyed to the personnel. All management of change actions must be coordinated, integrated with the current operating procedures, and operating personnel must be oriented to the changes in the procedures before the changes are made, right? So that means you don't make the change and then revise the procedure after the equipment's already running, right? When the process is shut down, in order to make a change, then the operating procedures must be updated before the startup of the process. There's videos there on the Chemical Safety Board website where it's like they made the change after the process was already up and running. There's an accident occurred where a heat exchanger blew up 12 years after this, right? So anyway. Operating instructions for each procedure should include the applicable safety precautions and should contain appropriate information on safety implications. Operating procedures need to address operating parameters containing operating instructions about pressure limits, temperature ranges, flow rates, what to do when an upset condition occurs, what alarms and instruments are pertinent if an upset condition occurs, and other subjects. Operating instructions must clearly indicate the distinctions between startup and normal operating, such as the appropriate allowances for heating up a unit to reach the normal operating parameters. Operating instructions need to describe the proper method for increasing the temperature of the unit until the normal operating temperature. Realize that this is criteria that your reviewers, as technical reviewers or validations, be informed. Notice that these are all the PSM procedure, I mean, not procedure solution, but the process safety management requirements that they assume that you guys are doing, that we find routinely that's not happening, right? Now, let's shift gears now. Let's look at the commercial news, right? Quality assurance requirements for nuclear facilities, right? A standard was provided, right? That says it provides requirements and guidelines for establishment and execution of quality assurance programs during the siting, design, construction, operation, decommissioning, nuclear power plants, small modular reactors, advanced reactors. So this NQA1 National Quality Assurance Standard applies to all these things. So let's look at some of the things it says. Now, in that standard, there's an Appendix B, talks about procedures, right? Matter of fact, it is right here. Now, I took this from a utility that I've done work with, so that's why it's kind of redacted in some places. But this was their, notice how it talks about, just for in summary, procedures are sufficiently detailed for a qualified individual to perform the required function without direct supervision. If you attended any of my classes, we said, hey, what's the level of detail that we need to have? We said, hey, we need to make sure that the level of detail is for a qualified, although inexperienced person with no contact with your supervisor. Well, guess where that requirement came from? The PPA. Procedures are sufficiently detailed for qualified individuals, right? And so you get in there. Notice in here, without direct supervision, so you see the parallels. This whole paragraph is talking about procedure use adherence. So for some of you that have procedure use adherence documents that don't comply with it, so everybody says, oh, well, that's the IMPO requirement for procedure use adherence. It's in NQA1. It's part of your quality assurance standard. Look at it says right here, guidance is established, identify the manner in which procedures are implemented, including identification of the steps that require the procedure to be present and followed step by step while the task is being performed, or the user to have committed the procedure steps to memory, right? So notice all this stuff is all part of NQA1. That's part of, I mean, where do you think IMPO created it in 2011 or actually 2009? The stuff that you find in the IMPO documents at Institute of Nuclear Power Operations came from NQA1, right? Where it was. So that was that. So in summary, I have these slides. It says, hey, procedures are sufficiently detailed. Guidance is established to identify the manner in which procedures are implemented, and procedures that are required to be present and referred to directly or developed for extensive jobs and so on, right? Then you come over here and you look at the next piece of it. Then there's a document control piece, which gets to what my main focus of this lunch and learn is on the review process, right? In summary, for this NQA1, so here's what that document looks like. So here's this document control, and this is all the things that came in NQA1, right? And I have it all highlighted here. All right. When you look at it in summary, procedures governing generating site activities, see Appendix B, are reviewed by qualified people other than the originator or preparer. Now, at your site, do you define who is a qualified person, right? Other than the person who developed the change? Such procedure review includes the determination whether additional cross-disciplinary reviews are required. Provisions include levels of use, such as requiring the document to be present at the work location. Revisions to controlled documents are reviewed for adequacy and approved for release by the same organization as originally did so, or by other designated organizations that are qualified and sufficiently knowledge of requirements and attentive original. Well, this sometimes is talking about when you farm things out the Westinghouse or different agent, different engineering firms, right? Controls are in place that establishes the programmatic procedure preparation, review, and usage controls to ensure procedures are technically and administratively correct. But what's the issue here? Notice in both of these regulatory areas, the requirements communicate what is required, but do they communicate how to ensure these programmatic controls accomplish these requirements? Is it okay that the whole process is done inside your head? No. Right? Obviously, it is purposely vague so as not to dictate to the company how to perform this work. But in the end, the regulator does expect the programmatic controls put in place accomplish the intent of what was just on these prior slides. So here lies the problem. Procedure validation, right? So remember I said, what is a procedure validation? So to understand validation, comparing and contrasting the terms verification and validation can be really helpful, right? Verification is the process of checking a procedure to make sure it's technically correct. Well, how do you do that? Right? I mean, that seems to be kind of vague. Oh, it's not coming up. All right. So what I was going to click on was a checklist. Many times we come to grips and say, hey, for consistency, to ensure that we're getting the technical reviews performed consistently at a high quality level, we'll create a checklist of common questions that technical reviewers should learn, that should be able to do. And if they don't feel they're qualified to answer all those questions, then they basically hand it to someone to answer those specific questions that are qualified to answer those specific questions on that technical review checklist, right? Many places I go, there's no checklist. Technical review is based on however you feel that day. Not to take away from you the knowledge and abilities and experience they have, but for some of us, we have 30, 40 years of experience. So you can expect that we have a pretty thorough technical review from our experience. You got some people that are fresh right out of college doing technical reviews. Not to say that I'm taking anything away from their college education and stuff, but when they have no experience with all this equipment and work that they're doing, it's hard for me to say that they're thinking of all the things they should be thinking of to say that this technically review is good, right? Validation. It's the process of exercising the procedure. So when you look at a validation, here's an example of a validation checklist. You know, are new or revised steps, can they be performed out of sequence? Can the new or revised steps be performed in the sequence written? Are there specific limits provided? You know, is there places to record the data that they're asking you to do? Are the steps provided in a logical order? Are the units as they appear on the instrument that you have to get the data from? Do steps return you to the correct step? You know, is there sufficient detail? Are there trip sensitive steps clearly identified? You know, is it specified how and to whom required communications occur, right? Are the component physical locations accurate? Are the words and symbols used specific and familiar? You know what I mean? So what I'm trying to get at is that, you know, and then you can have multiple people write their comments in here. You can have multiple people do a validation, right? But that should be done by some checklist. Make sure that you have make sure that you have some expected quality level of what a validation should occur versus being so subjective, right? Now, then you get in here and you look at it. So what is a validation? Well, it could be a user or a team of users can perform a validation, and they should be performing all new procedures. Now, this is kind of vague, extensive changes to the technical procedures. Sometimes we will look at that and say if the intent of the procedure has changed, the scope of the procedure has changed, and more than 51% of the procedure has changed, you know? So there's some criteria that you can help clarify what they may be by extensive changes, right? Anything that supports the procedures for an emergency operating procedure or now normal operating procedure. You think someone just dreamt that up in the nukes? No, that's because we didn't do that at some point in time and we screwed it up. So there you go, right? Typical validation methods include system or equipment walkthroughs, performance on or mock-up on spare equipment, similar scenarios, tabletop discussions. Best practice is to use a checklist, right? As noted on the previous slide, a control procedure change process can create the standardization and controls necessary to eliminate technical safety and human performance error greatly. As noted by the Chemical Safety Board, an investigation of BP DeepWater Horizon, you know, procedures are more than just a set of instructions, right? They're there to make sure that you achieve the intended results, because if you rely on people alone, they will let you down, right? So the PPA, the Procedure Professionals Association, developed a standard over 20 years ago, right? That is called PPA AP 90701. It's called the Procedure Process Description. This document can be obtained through the Procedure Professional Association, and I highly recommend it. Now, I don't care how big of a company you are or how small you are, we have written these things for multiple different industries. Some people only had 17 people that controlled the whole plant as compared to a 1,200, 1,000, 2,000 people, right? So what I'm trying to say is the one thing in common is that when you change procedures, there's 7 steps to do it. Sometimes those 7 steps can be written as simply as 5 or 10 pages of here it is, do this. It's compared to a commercial nuke where it's probably 130 to 140 pages long, right? Now, the process divided into 7 steps. As you can see, here are the 7 steps. First off is, as a matter of fact, let's get to the 7 steps. So here's step 1. Now, I'm giving you the high level. In this document, it breaks out specifically and defines and it clarifies each one of these sub-steps on what they are and what they should be consisting of, that you can use to perform a gap analysis of what your process is to what the standard is saying that you should consider. We use this for all our evaluations to say this sets the standard. And I will tell you is that when we have found major procedure quality issues, one or multiple of these steps is missed. And so then it helps us basically say, hey, look, here's the steps that you need to add to your process to help you get better and help you avoid this problem in the future, right? First off, everyone that at that work site should have the ability to submit some type of document that says this procedure is broke, this procedure needs to be changed, this procedure needs to be enhanced, but everyone should have access to something where they can do that. I've gone to some plants, and you know what that process is? A sticky tab that's placed on someone's desk. That is not a process. That is an accident waiting to happen, right? That change request then gets an initial screening, sometimes by an immediate supervisor or whoever owns the document, so they can look at it and say, you know, this procedure is not wrong. I think you read that wrong, but it is indicative that the wording of this is not clear because somehow you read it to think this when this is really technically this. So we do need to fix the wording on it, or maybe there's a step missing or whatever else, right? And so that there's initial screening done, and then that request is evaluated further, and then there's a priority given to it, right? Because somehow in there, is it broke? We need to fix it now and turn it around. Is it something that we need to do before the next shift occurs? Is it something that's just an enhancement? Is it something that's just a editorial change? So we want to look at the priority of things because we never have enough resources to do all the work. If you have a fairly strong culture, then you're going to get a lot of change requests. If you don't have any change requests, there's something wrong. Step 2, all right. That change request now is evaluated normally by an owner, whoever owns it. Every document should have an owner to it. Sometimes there's a backlog of things. Maybe if you're the manager of operations, you know that you have multiple different procedures that have had requests to be improved, and they're all sitting there waiting for someone to have availability to do it. And so then what we're going to do is we're going to evaluate that, set priority on things, and then determine how much of a review through our review process does this need to be done? Is the change to this procedure limited to just a couple steps, one section? Is the whole document have to be reviewed? Well, that can change how thorough the reviews need to be based on the volume of work that needs to be applied to do it and do it right? And then someone that gets assigned this work, someone I hope has been trained on how to do this work, right? On do this. That person, and again, this isn't a sales pitch, but we teach the PPA certification classes. We teach, and this is where we teach this stuff. We teach people how to understand what the scope is, look at operating experience, evaluate outstanding issues, look at the references and commitments, how to determine how much technical content they should do, evaluate human performance challenges, how to develop a draft, and then make sure that draft gets handed to whoever asked for it in the first place, and make sure that they look at it and say, yeah, this is what I asked for. That's great. Or they look at it and say, I have no idea what the heck you just did because this is not what I was looking for. So we want to make sure all that gets clarified, right? Then step 3 gets done. You move the step, and you got to have a question attitude. So I threw these slides in here. You got to have a great question attitude. No matter what you do, you got to make sure you separate your facts from assumptions, validate your assumptions, be aware of the critical aspects of what you're working on. Do not assume that every approved source is applicable and infallible. I've yet to find a perfect piece of engineering. I've seen more procedure writers and planners find stuff that's broken with some engineering document that's been through a complete review process, and someone just has that one nugget of, well, what about this? And they're like, oh, we didn't think of that, you know? So anyway, so don't approve that the vendor manual, the tech manual that was written in China and then converted to English is always right. If you see something that's like, well, this makes no sense to me, but yet when I look at it, this procedure now is at Rev 7. This change happened at Rev 3. This means this step's been there for 4 or 5 years. Oh, I must be missing something. So it has to be okay. There's chemical safety board stuff that shows that where stuff blew up after sitting there for 12 years, right? Do not follow procedures without critical thinking. People cannot be robots. There's a reason why procedures are revised, right? And do not be so arrogant. Like I was a licensed reactor operator, senior control room operator. I was licensed. And I would tell you is sometimes we think we know everything. We're the people licensed to run the plants. This is what we do. You know, we've been trained for a couple of years before we ever started our jobs, right? And now, you know, do not be so arrogant to say, you know, we ought to ask this, you know, the system engineer or the design engineer about this, because this makes no sense, right? Additionally, in the classes that we teach, we talk about all these human performance error likely situations. There's 18 of them. Right now, like as I said, we have like over almost 4,000 documents in the queue to be worked. I just hired 12 people, right, to handle all the work that we have. And we're looking at these human performance challenges. And they're all over the place. Many times people had no idea that these things were human performance challenges, right? Then you go in there and you go to step 4 and it says, all right, now you need to determine the appropriate reviews, right? Who's the reviewers? Make sure you get the right people. Who's the best people? Have you got some change to a diesel generator procedure and you know you have someone at your location that is like the subject matter expert? Get them to be the reviewer, not someone that occasionally works on this thing and they're a general mechanic, right? Perform the reviews. Make sure you have some process that when people provide your comments back, that you don't lose any of them, that you have some way of making sure that you have a special folder. Maybe it's a folder inside your desk, like the old school way, and you print it out and you put it in a folder. Make sure that you don't read it, right? And then make sure the procedure is validated, right? Validated. Oh, critical step. Just had a customer that's using dynamic electronic procedures have a major equipment failure, because there was a branching step in a procedure that now in dynamic electronic procedures, not necessarily always an if, then, when, then type set. It's like, say, you know, do you meet this? Yes or no? Well, if it's yes, then the procedure automatically takes you to the next step versus you having to do that manually like we've done on paper for years, right? It took them to the wrong step. So what happened was they realized that, hey, they're still using the same old change process for like shuffling paper through the process and not taking into account the new digital potential errors in that digital platform. And they really didn't think of that. So it was poor change management associated with taking on new technology. They were basically printing out a hard copy of the document, sending that to the review cycle. No one was looking at it. They were just relying on the procedure writer that make sure that they have the right link go to the right place. It's not a good thing to do. Make sure now that the procedure's been reviewed, make sure it's ready for approval, make sure that maybe if there's an on-site safety review that needs to be done for safety, obtain that, and then you get like it's approved. So now the document's approved, right? Maybe whoever owns it signs it and says approved. But now we need to think about what training needs to be done. Is there any change management that needs to be done? Communication, coordination, you know, do we need a change management plan for this? Many cases, this is a no, never mind. In some cases, when you get an administrative process documents, it's huge. I rewrote a safety document for a large utility out in California, 26,000 employees, and impacted everybody, right? It took me literally probably 6 to 8 weeks to write the document, and it probably took almost a year to manage all the change management with it, right? And then lastly, you get, once all the change management stuff is done, whoever is the ultimate authority that says, yes, I approve this document, signs it, and it gets sent out. And it basically, now you're with document control and trying to figure out what to do with it, right? So why should we care all about this? Ultimately, when developing procedures, our goal is to manage knowledge-based performance. And the only way you're going to manage it is make sure that the review process is thorough, that it checks all the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed, that you've considered all the potential failure mechanisms so that the person who performs it can be safe and successful, right? We have a online class in January. This is the information, the cost for it. If you're looking for how to write human factor procedures, this is something that we've trained over 21,000 people in the last 15 years. And so anyway, you can see us on LinkedIn. We advertise for that, wherever else. Additionally, here, the Procedure Professional Association, here's their website. They have a symposium, a conference that's going to be in Vancouver, Washington in June of 2024. Highly recommend that. I was one of the key speakers in June of this past one, along with many other very, pretty cool speakers, I guess we're going to call it, very informative speakers that you could do. You can walk away with learning a lot of stuff. And in the end, I hope that this gave you some ideas. If anybody, I'll stick around here if anybody has any questions for things, but additionally, here's my contact information. Drop me an email. You can call me on this number, send me a text message, whatever you want to do. Be glad to try to answer any questions for you as you move forward with it. But please think about the review process. What does your process look like? Is it up to today's standards? Are you aware of what they are? Because the review process is the make it or break it point, right? People can be very, very good writers and do the best they can, but they need backup, right? And it can't be someone just signing something that says technical review is done. And then you ask the person, well, what did you consider in your technical review? And they kind of stare at you. I see that a lot, too much, right? There's no reason. I mean, hey, we have a business fixing procedures, right? We're doing too well. Think about that, right? Anyway, thank you for your consideration, and if there's anything we can do to help you, let us know.